So everybody thought he drowned. His parents, his friends, Michigan State University. 3 years later, you are not going to believe this. We have been gathering reports, autopsies, no water in the lungs, no water in the stomach. Other medical examiners say this case never should have been closed. And that's not it. There's some evidence in question. There's a timeline. It doesn't make sense. Some information the parents didn't even know till a couple days ago. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to put all of these interviews right now. You take a look at the investigator, the parents, the medical examiner. What do you think? Should this case be opened up again? Okay, what about the lungs? When you take a look at the report, it doesn't note that there was water in the lungs, but he died from drowning.
Well, this is a big question. Not every body that is submerged and found submerged resulted there from drowning. A person may be dead before being placed in the body of water. Generally, careful evaluation of all the possible and available materials there will lead you to a conclusion. If it is not possible to conclude, then the case is best left undetermined, not closed, because there is a good suspicion that someone might have generated some less visible or less apparent injury in a decomposed decomposed remains being found, and foul play cannot be safely excluded, and that's where the due diligence comes into picture. This is what government is all about. The government is paid in performing medical legal investigations of death to be suspicious and to be thorough and to be open-minded. But you cannot confuse open mind with empty-headedness in making decisions along the way. You have to be focused on the case and pursue this. And as far as I'm concerned, all I can comment about this case is that this is not over. This has to be sorted out. And sorting out comes from multidisciplinary investigation, meaning mobilizing all the available resources and manpower to put the jigsaw puzzle together, because this is a jigsaw puzzle.
So it's not solved?
Oh, no, far from that. Proclaiming that it's solved, stamping it out, is not fair by any measure, under any circumstance, and it does not conform to the principle of medical legal death investigation, because we have to provide the answer. We have to provide the answer about the cause, about the mechanism of death, and about the manner of death.
And that's not answered in this report.
Well, the report contains the assumption that the young man drowned, and the circumstances are unclear, and whenever there is involvement of alcohol or drugs or any major happening, and I understand that this was tied into a major social and public and sports happening at the time, you have to be focused and to pursue this to the point of providing the opportunity. Maybe you can't get all the answers necessarily. You can't get all the answers to the questions that may be put forward, but that does not mean that you have to the opportunity to shut it down and not think about it anymore. This is an open case. In my mind, and in everybody's mind, it should be an open case until you can provide some opportunity to, first of all, to closure for the family members, and then to sort this out for a mere public reason, because it's an unnatural death. An unnatural death with unanswered questions.
Does that worry you?
Well, it is a concern. Obviously, it's a concern. It's not in my jurisdiction, so I cannot actively participate, but if called, I will gladly participate. If called, anyone should participate because this is for the common good.
Yeah.
This is the type of thing, and this is why we exist.
That's your job, is
The
to
medical
determine.
examiner's function is to carry out all of these investigations that are necessary to provide the answers as a statutory obligation. Closing the case too early out of convenience or inconvenience is not the answer to the proper approach in that investigation.
As we dive into this, and I'll wrap it up after this, as we dive into this, is there a red flag or anything I should specifically be looking into, or a question that isn't answered? I know you mentioned a couple things, but is there one glaring example that has you concerned?
Well, it is. There is no proof that this young man drowned. The fact that he was found, his body was found in the body of water several months after his disappearance, does not mean that they drowned under the circumstances. And that's the critical unanswered question. That starts the triggers all of the ramifications and all of the concerns and all of the reasons to pursue this investigation, not to
Just because you're found in a body of water doesn't mean you drowned in the body of water.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. This is the drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion. So where everything and anything is considered, and you cannot be sure how much of alteration of tissues due to decomposition can ensue in someone's remains. You can't rely on that and say, oh well, I didn't notice any injuries, so that must be drowning. Well, it's not, and it's not a satisfactory answer, and it has to be followed up.
What would we have seen if it was drowning? What things would we have seen, perhaps?
While looking at the rest of the findings in the body, although there is decomposition, there is no significant finding to convince anyone that there was substantial inhalation of water into the lungs. In order to drown, you have to be asphyxiated by the effect of water blocking the airways and blocking the air sacs, filling the air sacs. And if someone is unconscious, that can happen very fast. If someone is not unconscious and they're struggling, they can have water in their stomach because of swallowing, because of the agonal fight to stay above the water, to maintain adequate breathing. So there are all kinds of special circumstances in a situation when the body ends in the water. But if the body ends in the water lifeless, then there is none of this, and that should be the red flag for, hey, this might have been something else. Yeah. And I, off the top of my head, I cannot offer you possibilities, but there are possibilities, and those possibilities have to be checked. And for that, the investigation of the circumstances that preceded this, and individuals being interrogated, interviewed, questioned, whatnot, is a necessary part of any process.
Even initially, when Brendan's body was recovered, there was a lot of people, myself, my family, the Santo family, his friends, that had a lot of doubts about how he actually got in the river, and were really suspect about whether or not Brendan actually drowned in the river.
You were suspect in the very beginning on whether or not he drowned?
In the very beginning, and I would say both the dad and I were. It's still not necessarily easy to get into the river. Mm-hmm. And at no point was I ever confident, and I'm less confident today, that they ever knew where he went in the river. And if you look at the distance that he went and the type of water, 290-degree angles, big S curves, an unspeakable amount of debris and trees and brush to make it that far. Not saying it's impossible, but those things just really started to add up with the concern. I sent in a FOIA request for the police report and the autopsy. She started doing some additional research, and she basically said to me, she's like, Ryan, you've got to get this to a medical examiner. Like, a different medical examiner needs to take a look at this. That's when I did. I had a chance to meet with medical examiner, and I asked him, I said, tell me what happened to this person, and basically handed him the report. And then he said, I can tell he was found in the water, and that's in reference to how the skin is described. 10 seconds later, he said, well, I can tell you one thing, he didn't drown. You know, a chief medical examiner, chief forensic pathologist, 30 years of experience, looks at this and says, he didn't drown. There's no indication. I can't point to anything in here that is going to tell you that.
And I'm going to go specifically to the Dragovich interview, because that's what I can reference, because that's what I was a part of. When sitting down and interviewing him, he said, there is no proof of drowning. There is no water in the lungs or the stomach, and there should be more questions. This case should not be closed.
I agree with everything he said. And there are things in the police report also that support that alone, outside of the autopsy even, that there are questions that weren't answered. But this is why we have science, right? I mean, this is why we have this profession, because we have the knowledge now to base stuff like this on real science. Well, after I talked to Dragovich, I talked to Brad, and this was the first time that I told him, I said,
oh, okay.
Brendan didn't drown. And then Brad tells me, he says, would you, before I tell Wendy, I don't know if I would say this, but he said, before I tell Wendy, can you get another opinion? And I can talk about, you want me to talk about that?
So, I talk with the Oakland County Medical Examiner, and you brought this to 3 different MEs just to really get their opinion.
I did, because I sat down with Brad, and Brad and I have stayed in touch. We try to get together, at least once a month, if not more, and have coffee and just catch up. We sat down, and, you're telling, after you've already, told him your son is dead, you show up at his house at midnight. So now I'm sitting down with him at a coffee place and saying, Brad, Brendan didn't drown, and it was that look of, it was shock, and it was emotional. It was shock from a standpoint of hearing it out loud, and then how I was able to support it with who I'd spoken with on it. I don't know if he was necessarily all that surprised, but he was shocked, if that makes sense. Because in his heart, I know that he just never could. He was out there, like I told you before, he was out there with me so many times. He couldn't picture it either. So he asked, he's like, would you mind talking to, can you find a couple other people before, I mean, it's such a big deal. So I was able to find 2, again, chief medical examiners out of state in 2 different states that were willing to review it, and not to go through a 45-minute conversation, but essentially they said, there's nothing that you are showing me, Ryan, that I can make a determination of drowning on. And I even kind of pleaded with him a little bit. I said, make the case though. Like what if, is there something here? Like, just what could be the faintest thing that you would point to as a cause, this is a drowning victim? I said, they both said I can't. One went as far as saying that, no, it was that case absolutely should have never been closed.
So he leaves Yakeley.
Yes.
And the last time his phone pings is 12:09. Tell me about that.
It's significant It's very significant because when you look at this case, a big part is where did he go in the river? We know that he didn't go in where they initially were doing the search, because for a few reasons, and we can talk about those, but regarding the ping in particular, the ping at 1209 was at the southwest corner of Harrison and Michigan. The southwest corner is away from the river 90 feet, okay? I saw that ping initially during the first round of the investigation, and so did Brad. Brad asked about the ping. It's like, well, look, this is from Yakeley where he was going. At the same time, I've got screenshots of his Google walking map, the blue dot walking map that he had plugged in knowing where he was heading. And he was basically told a lot of the new 5G technology can be glitchy and not to put too much into that. When Verizon was asked about the accuracy specifically of that 1209 ping, the security professional who commented on it said, and I'm not verbatim, but essentially this, I would regard it as a highly accurate ping due to its proximity to the tower, which was less than 800 or 900 feet away.
So he's alive at 1209. This is what's interesting that not a lot of people know, according to these reports that you were able to get. The phone pings at 239. Why is that important?
So I am not an electrical engineer. I am not a phone forensic specialist. We know his battery was dying at 1209. About that time, the battery died. He'd mentioned it to his friends. There was no other pickups of his phone until 2:39 in the morning. So you ask, well, how can that happen? And
because could it ping in the water?
so the likelihood of it reaching a cell tower in the water is even at 12 inches. Most studies would say in moving water, silt, sediment, 12 inches, maybe the cellular, the RF signal makes it 15 meters, 20 meters, okay? But not only that, it needs to be turned on, okay? And this is something that I think is really important considering the 239 time frame. If you attempt to turn your phone on with a dead battery, a lot of people get the red bar, it comes up on the phone and it's telling you your battery is low. But in that process, in the boot process of these phones, one of the first processes that the phone looks for is cellular connectivity or Wi-Fi connectivity, because most of the apps rely on that to operate. All the apps we use essentially need it in some form or fashion. So it's one of the very first things. It actually initiates before the BIOS or the safety system for the battery comes into play. In that duration of time from turning it on, immediately looking for connectivity, to the period where the phone shuts itself off to protect the battery, it has been proven and it's shown that a phone can make cellular connection, albeit brief.
But what does that mean then? So his phone pings at 239. Maybe he fell into the river after.
Let me say it this way. The original narrative is that he walked out of Yakeley Hall and into the river. Mm-hmm. Well, now we know at 1209 he wasn't in the river.
And now we know at 239 he's not in the river.
So we have 2.5 hours of unaccounted time where, although there are witnesses that make statements regarding seeing him, we don't know where Brendan is at during that time, but we're confident he's not in the river.
You know, just because you're found in a river doesn't mean you drowned in a river. Was there a rush to close this case?
The autopsy alone should have been plenty. It should have been plenty to say, wait, we can't close this case on this, okay? We can't close this on what these autopsy findings are, right?
And that leads us to questions of police work. And when you go through some of these documents, and you can see there was an example that a cell phone was actually found in a location that Brendan was last
pinged.
Documented,
yes.
Right, pinged. So Brendan's at a location, his phone's pinged. The next day, a random cell phone's found,
Right.
but they don't do anything with that cell phone. Well, tell me what happens.
Well, I'd ask the question. I'd ask the question to you or anybody: how often do you see a phone
Right.
sitting on the sidewalk or a street? I can't think of a time I have. Somebody turned in a phone that was right at that intersection near Harrison and Michigan, and the next day and said, "Hey, I heard that a young man went missing. I don't know if this might be helpful." The phone was looked at. It was a Motorola phone. It had a cracked screen. Brendan had an iPhone 12. Report states that the phone was essentially looked at, and it was determined, because it was a Motorola model phone, that it was not related to the case.
Well, you're an investigator. What would you have done with that phone?
They gave it to the lost and found. That's not what I would have done. I would have bagged it, put it in evidence. Maybe you're not going to forensically study at that moment, but you don't put it in the lost and found. If it's 3 miles from the area, okay, I get it. But when it's within several feet of where he was last pinged, maybe it had nothing to do with it. Maybe it had everything to do with it. Maybe it had all the information we needed, but we don't know. We can't know now. I hope, I pray, family does, that the state of Michigan Police Department will reopen it. Because there are things in here that they, I believe, would be able to address quickly. I think the process for them would be to review it and determine if reopening it is appropriate. I would say the same thing with the autopsy.
Right.
It needs to be reviewed. The photos need to be reviewed. I've not gotten the photos yet. I've asked for the photos. I've asked for the autopsy photos as a representative of the family, and I still am not in receipt of those. What has bothered me also about not being in receipt of those is that in the autopsy itself, it doesn't even cite photos. Now, I've not looked at a lot of autopsies, but I've not also ever seen one that didn't cite or index photos in the report. So I don't know why they would have left that out.
Some may say these parents won't accept this case. They're looking for more.
Well, I think that every parent might look for more, right? Like if you go through this sort of tragedy, you know, you want to have all the information. But I mean, with this and what they have been through, the duration of this, as far as wanting more, it would be answers. The last place in the world they want to be right now is here. I mean, having this, it's like going through it twice, right? So they went through it once, one of the worst things that can happen to a person, and now because these questions were not answered, they're going through it again. So I would say to the naysayers, this is the absolute last place they wanted to be right now. They wanted to be on a course where maybe, however, a parent gets any sort of closure or peace when something like that happens, they'd want to be on that course. And they're not on that course now. They've actually went back.
It was reported he was drinking. His parents are not surprised at that. It's a college game, etc. But the stigma that, you know, there was this kid that was drunk that fell in the water. You look at the autopsy report, and it does say that there was levels of alcohol consumed. The ME agrees. But the question there is the percentage. You believe that what was reported should have been explained better.
Without explaining it, it's very misleading.
So dumb it down real quick in a usable, understandable way, because you're saying it says that there was alcohol. You're saying there should have been a disclaimer.
There should have been, if you're going to disclaim that his blood alcohol was at 0.22% after being submerged in an anaerobic environment in the water for 3 months, then you had better support it with the science that states the decomposition, the putrefaction processes in the body create ethanol. The same exact ethanol that tests on the blood panels. And in those conditions, especially because we know he had alcohol in his system prior, almost acts like an accelerant in that. statistically, there's less than a 5% chance that it would not report higher after that period of time. There's no exact formula for it, but I've talked to people who said they've seen it from nothing as high as 0.2%. But if you're going to say that about somebody, if that's the narrative that you're going to put out there as fact, people think of it in the terms of they do if there's a car death, right? If there's an automotive death where it's like, okay, blood was taken right then, it's going to be accurate. It's not the case here. And you need to disclaim that, because now it's like you said, it's the narrative of a drunk college student stumbles into the river.
And there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, in some ways I feel like we're back at the beginning of it. I mean, we really are.
What has this case meant to you? Because you've thrown your life into it.
It's a tough question. I mean, I don't. Maybe I'll look back on it someday and think of it, and maybe have an answer for it. I'd say that, you know, for both my wife and I, because she's been in this every step with me. She looks at every document, every piece. So it's hard to put in words. I really don't have a good answer. I don't know. Maybe when I feel that it's closed and that there are some answers, maybe at that point I'll be able to answer that. But I just can't right now, because
You're
it's
still
just
in it.
It's wide open. I mean, the case to me is wide open, and it needs closure. And then you can ask me that question when we get some closure.
I was talking to the medical examiner, and I was going through the video yesterday, and I just couldn't believe it's almost 3 years. Is it a different feeling? Is there growth? Is there not growth? There's not closure? Like, where do things stand some 3 years later?
Now that we're finally getting unnumb, I guess that's how I refer to it. Things are, I don't know, kind of back. It's all, I don't even know how to explain it. Is there closure? No, there's no closure.
No
for
closure.
sure.
No, I would say it hasn't gotten any better.
Because there's so many questions.
Yeah.
It'd be probably better if you could at least know or understand or put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah, there's still so many unknowns. We just really, I mean, we know where he ended up. We just don't know what happened to him. A lot of questions.
I want to start a little bit with Ryan, because he's a special person. And you didn't know him before. And he was sharing with me, his wife was really the one who really pushed him and his faith to kind of get involved. Brad, if you talk to me a little bit about the father-father connection, because that's what he talks to me a lot about. You know, he's investigated a variety of cases, but for some reason he said he felt he needed to help you.
Yeah, we just, he reached out, and I'm not one that would typically reach back out to someone, because we were getting a lot of communication at that time, and his email just kind of stuck with me, and we hit it off from like day one. You know, we just felt like we knew each other for a long time, and I mean, he certainly has been instrumental in helping us, you know, through this.
What made him trustworthy? What made him be able to connect with you?
He was just genuine from, you know, he really just, from day one, from I met him, I mean, he just, you know, you can probably tell, he's a bulldog. So he just was very genuine, wanted to help. You know, it really wasn't about him.
Yeah.
He didn't want any attention. Actually, it was the reverse of it. He really didn't want anybody to know that he was even involved. So I think that really struck home for me, because it was more focused on us and Brendan versus, you know, trying to do something for him. And you could just tell from the moment I talked to him. I mean, I think the first time I talked to him, we sat down for 3-4 hours.
Yeah.
And I was like, we got to go.
Yeah.
You know,
For you, Wendy, in terms of this, you know, man that says, hey, I want to help you with this case, what was your first gut feeling on that?
I didn't know about everything in the beginning, but I was skeptical, leery of it, and then after Brad met with him, then it was okay. He really just truly wants to help. He wants to help us find him, and so that was very comforting. So
At that time, he makes that phone call to you and tells you, you know,
he came over.
or came over.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was running through your mind at that time? Was it, you obviously had to have had some hope that he was still alive.
Yeah, it was, I mean, shocking. I wouldn't say surprising, because as time went on, you know, we were preparing ourselves. Obviously, we hoped that we would find him, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of surreal. Like, it's,
And investigators say that Brendan drowned. What did you think when they told you that?
I never really thought that that's what happened.
Why?
It just, knowing him, it's just, you know, the way that they described it, like, it just didn't make sense to me that, you know, he just left the dorm and fell into the water. So we didn't really think too much about it until Ryan, you know, kept digging and, you know, found out additional information that threw more questions into what happened. So,
And that's kind of why we're here today in terms of those questions. So I spoke with the medical examiner and we looked at the autopsy report, and there was no water in the lungs, no water in the stomach. And they said, you can't rule drowning right now. There's too many questions.
It's shocking, just because, especially, we were going through a lot at the time, and then they're professionals. That's their job. I just assumed that it would be correct. So it's not comforting, but in a way, it's better than that he drowned. Knowing that he didn't drown, because that's a hard one to swallow. So it's just, we hope to get more answers. So that's the biggest thing, of not just.
There's a lot of talk too just about the placement of where, you know, the phone was pinged and where the river was. And we don't have to go into too much information about why you would probably not go that far into the river, as we discussed, you know, at lunch. But it did seem like he would have had to traverse a long way.
yeah, well, the last ping that we weren't aware of, you know, from early in the morning, that they decided not to tell us. I mean, that throws more questions for us. So, because you put 3.5, 4 hours in between, you know, his pings that we were aware of. So, in our last pings for him, like we talked about, he was on the path of where he was supposed to go. So
investigators never called and told you about that ping at 2:39?
no.
Even now?
No.
So you found out
We
through
found
Ryan.
out through Ryan, through the police report, that he got. You know, the hard thing is the autopsy, so that threw questions into it, and multiple people looked at it. You know, when Ryan first called me on it, I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's not really our expertise. So then when, you know, 3-4 people looked at it and said the same thing, there had questions, then the last ping, it just opens up more questions. So, you know, 3.5 hours later, that's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a really, really long time. So it's hard for us, because we don't know what happened in that time frame.
Yeah. Did he talk to you about that phone that was found? It piqued my curiosity in the sense that it was in the area of that 1209 ping.
Yeah.
A Motorola phone, it was found, it was cracked, but they just put it in the lost and found.
Yeah.
It's just another question of police responsibility.
Yep.
What do you think about how this case was handled through the police?
It's a tough question. So, I mean, the people that we dealt with day to day were great people. I think we have some concerns from people above them. For us, I just think we'd like to see the state police or someone else look at the case. I don't think this type of case is something that comes up that often, or that they really have the background or resources to be able to do it. So it's kind of a tough question. I mean, there were long periods of time where they didn't do anything. You know,
Yeah.
4, 5, 6 weeks, nothing. You know, we had resources from Oakland County was great. And we learned stuff through this, you know, because we supposedly did this task force, and then we found out, you know, it's like, why isn't Oakland County out there or some of the other people? So we made a couple calls, and they're like, we can't go until they ask us to go.
Right.
They've only asked us once. So we just, again, assuming the good in everybody, that if people are willing to help, why wouldn't you let those people help? So I don't, you know, like I said, the people we dealt with day to day, you know, were great to us. We just question, you know, how much effort they put into to really looking through it. And then some of these questions, you know, with the phone ping and finding them in a different shirt, like why someone wouldn't question that. The autopsy I get because it's pretty technical, and, you know, maybe, I don't know, I read part of it, I don't know what I'm reading, you know.
Yeah.
But some of these other things should have drawn some questions.
And out of respect, to share that information with the parents.
Yeah.
You have a right to know that.
Yeah, the ping on the phone, I mean, I sat in a room with the, you know, Michigan State Police and an expert from the state police, and they never shared that ping. I don't know that they had it at the time, but it was pretty far along, so I would assume that they
Right.
did. So
And when they finally did discover it, you know that they had to know in the past 3 years that there was that ping that no one talked about
Yeah.
that he received.
yeah,
What do you think about the police work, Wendy?
It's hard to say. Again, the people that we dealt with, we were appreciative for. They were honest with us, talking to us, communicating with us. But why didn't they ask for other areas to come in? Especially they had breaks for the university. They had illnesses in the departments. So why didn't they reach out to ask for others' help when others had said they were willing to help? So I think that would have helped moving things along, finding things faster.
Was there a rush to close the case, do you think?
No. I don't know. I know we wanted to get his belongings back.
Yeah.
And they can't be released yet. To us, not getting the stuff back meant that they were looking at it. Again, I don't know how it all works. But I guess we assumed that they were keeping it for purposes, although there wasn't really much of his, it was his change of clothes, so.
I assume the what's next is asking another agency to take over this case.
yeah. We would like this. I mean, we would like to have the case reopened. You know, we don't know what that process. We don't know what that process is, though. I don't know that there is one. The hope is that, you know, through what we're doing and what Ryan has been working on, that we can at least get them, you know, either the state police or MSU police to reopen it and look at it. So we just want to know what happened to our son.
Is there anything that you think is important as we share Brendan's story about Brendan?
He was a great kid. He had a funny sense of humor, a great smile. The friend to the people who didn't have a friend, wanted to, it didn't matter. He was a friend. He was the person that people gravitated to because he was just friendly and open and,
Yeah. I think we just want one of his friends put it a good way. You know, I don't do it, but, you know, I think he framed it and said, you know, I want to be able to go on Google
yeah, and
and not see what I see,
yeah.
because that wasn't him.
No, there's a lot more.
Yeah,
No, he was the one that always made sure everybody got home.
yeah,
That was one of the last texts that we saw. Just checking on a friend at Grand Valley. Make sure that she got home okay.
Checking on that friend while he was at state.
Yeah. Right before his phone went out. That was Brendan.